Hello everyone. In this lesson, we are going to learn about refactoring and debugging. So these are not Angular specific concept per se. These are more like in general software development concepts. With any programming language, when you implement something, sometimes you will notice that things are not working exactly as you expect, and in those scenarios you will have to investigate a little bit further to see where the problem is. And once you find the problem, you might need to modify your code a little bit to do the functionality slightly differently or address that problem. So that's why we're going to see an example of debugging and refactoring for that. So far we have implemented this logging feature, and once a user logs in, it goes to the recent albums component. So let's see that in action. So it came to the recent album component, but as you notice that the albums are not showing up yet. But then if you refresh the page and if you go to the recent album, now the albums are showing up. So these kind of problem where the actual functionality is sometimes working and sometimes breaking, this is called like intermittent behavior. It's the problem is intermittent. It's not always consistent. But we want it to be always consistently behave similar way. So let's try to debug that. So let's log out, clear this, and then let's think about what happens when the user actually sign in. So for that, we can go to the user service, and you can see that when the user log in, we basically just type that nice, it worked, and then we navigate to this particular route, album/recent. That means the recent album components get loaded. Now if we open the recent album component, when this component is initialized, we call this get album service dot get all albums. So let's put a log here to make sure that we are actually calling the API. So console.log calling album service from component. So it's going to print that when the album service is called from the component. Now let's open the album service, and then here this method is called get all albums, and it's actually a HTTP GET request, and it also requires the header. So here let's make sure that we are calling this. So calling get all albums method with header, and then let's also print the header here. Now let's save that and let's see that in action. So if we try to sign up again, so as you can see that user tried to log in and then it worked, and then calling get all albums method with header, and here comes the problem. The header is coming id token equals to null, so the id token is not there. Now if we refresh the page, then what happens is that the id token value is there, and if we go to the recent album, Now the albums are showing. So here it says that calling get all albums method with header. Now the header is there. So let's try to think again why this might be happening. So if we open the user service, because that's where we are putting the ID token, we can see here that this store ID token, this gets called from the constructor, and it's called using this dis.user subscribe. So what might be possible is that this constructor is getting called when the first time the service is initialized, but when the sign in happens, the login happens, at that time we are basically just logging in, and then we are going to that router. So at that time it's actually not calling that store ID token method, right? And but when we refresh the page, then this constructor get called again. But now that the user is logged in, so this part gets called, and now it actually stores the ID token. So when we are basically calling the login without refreshing the page, that's when we are missing this store ID token part. So let's see if we can do something similar when even the login happens. So we see here is that in the login method, we basically get this value, which is a Firebase auth user credential. Now if we look a little bit more inside this user, the user actually, not the user, sorry, this value dot, so the value actually has the user, which is a Firebase user, and here the user info is also a Firebase user. So what we can do is actually just with the user info, which is a Firebase user, we could get the ID token. Now so let's write a method for that. So that method will be very similar to this method, store ID token, and then here it will be actually a Firebase user. So let's copy that data type from firebase.user. .user, and once we have that, we can actually call Firebase user dot get ID token, and then dot then. So we have this duplicate method. So let's call this method get store ID token. So let's just call this method save ID token. So we can call this save ID token method with the Firebase user, and that should do the job. So here, once we have this value, we can call this dot save ID token, and here we can pass the value dot user, and after that we can navigate to the recent album, and in that case, right after the login, we are actually saving the ID token again, and then we are going to the recent albums. Let's see if it's working. So we're going to log out, and we'll clean this console, and then we'll try login with that same user. So in this case, now it worked because as soon as the user sign in, we actually store the ID token again before transferring the user to here. So the similar thing will be happening for sign up as well, because even during sign up, it's actually, so here during sign up also we get a value which is a Firebase auth user credential. So we can actually call the same method here so that even during sign up we also save the ID token. So that's how we debugged and solved a particular issue. Now let's think about refactoring. So as you can see that these two methods are actually like very similar, but just because they took slightly different parameter, that's why we have these two methods. Now you could keep these two methods, but anytime you need to make change to any of those logic, you need to make it in those two places. That is actually a bad software engineering practice. You want to actually like write reusable code so that you don't need to do that in multiple places. So one thing you could do for that is actually refactor your code here. So a store ID token that takes a promise, whereas the save ID token takes a Firebase user as input. So here instead of a store ID token, you could use the save ID token, and then you can just pass the user info there, because the user info is a Firebase user. And as a result, now your save ID token, you are calling that .get ID token inside this. So now you are using the save ID token method for both the scenario. You don't need the store ID token method anymore. But just to confirm, you should like always check that you are not using that method anymore. Yes, and you can actually delete this method now. So that's how you refactored your code a little bit to make sure that you are not duplicating any code. Thank you.